We are continuing our series from the Expedition Bible. It's where we take archaeological research that's been presented in videos and we integrate them into these messages. Last week we did the life of Abraham and what we call the Akedah, the near sacrifice of Isaac. This week is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So let's go ahead and read the text, and then we'll show you the first video segment. We're reading from Genesis 19, beginning in verse number 23. The title of the message is The Rescue Operation. It says in Genesis 19, and just to set the background, this is after Abraham has negotiated with God in prayer for Lot and his family who lived in Sodom. The three angels actually came to visit Abraham, and as they were getting ready to leave, after they had let him know that he was going to be, they let him know that they were going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And so then Abraham begins, well, will you do it if there's 50 righteous people, 40, 30, got it down to 10. And so then they leave, and we see what happens with Lot. The two angels go there. They want to violently take them by force, rape them. God doesn't allow that to happen, and so God rescues Lot and two of his daughters, not his entire family, and this is the aftermath beginning in Genesis 19, verse 23. Let's see what happens. It says, the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar, which meant he escaped from Sodom. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of the heavens. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. And so you'll notice it said in that passage that the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire, or what the King James Version calls fire and brimstone. And we're going to look at the first video segment to give a little bit of background on what that actually was.
So I'm up here on the site called locally Numera, and this is the site that the archaeologists associated with Gomorrah. So here you can see that ashy layer that's just underneath the surface. This is full of burned pottery. It's full of the fragments of human bones. The question is what evidence is there of this burning sulfur that rained down? Well, it seems that the culprit are these sulfur balls that are also found in this area.
Well, I'm off on a camping trip. Today I'm driving down to the southeast shoreline of the Dead Sea. And this is the area that the Bible calls the cities of the plain. It's also the area that has the archaeological sites that date to the time period of what's known as the early Bronze Age. And this is the time when Abraham and his nephew Lot lived. This is the time when the Bible says that the Lord destroyed the cities of the plain.
So I'm standing now at the largest of these early bronze sites on the southeast side of the Dead Sea. This one locally is known as Babedra, and is the site that is associated with Sodom in the Bible. It was discovered as an early bronze site back in 1924. It was excavated in the 1960s and 1970s. And what archaeologists found here was this burn destruction that goes across this site. This city came to an end through a fire destruction. So here you can see this ashy burn destruction layer just underneath the surface. It's full of human bone fragments, burned pottery, and it's covering the entire site. So off in the distance here, you can see Babadra, identified as Sodom. And then right here to the southwest is this massive cemetery that you can see with all these pits that mark its boundaries. And these are formed because of the locals for decades have been coming and digging into these graves looking for antiquities to sell in the antiquity market. And so it's estimated from the archaeologists that dug here back in the 60s and the 70s that there are around 500,000 people buried in this cemetery. And it's just staggering. And what's really intriguing then is that they found a burn destruction across the cemetery that happened at the same time that the city was destroyed. So the city and the cemetery were destroyed in the same fire disaster. And there's no reason why an army would attack a bunch of graves and burn a cemetery. And so this was one of the major reasons that they interpreted the destruction here as being caused by a natural disaster. In the excavation report, they show pictures of the bones in the graves that were warped by the heat.
So the point here is that it said fire and sulfur came down from heaven, and it was a heavily populated area that before this happened. And so you were seeing the archaeological evidence of reinforcing this story in the Bible. Let's go for a little bit more background on the passage. This is actually what I would call the second rescue operation of Lot, Abraham's nephew. The first one occurred when there was a war between tribal kings in the area. 5 tribal kings allied and went against the other 4, and Lot got caught in the midst of it, and he was taken hostage by one of the alliances. And Abraham, it says, got 318 men from his family, and they went and they rescued Lot from them. Abraham and Lot had separated, and so this was a rescue operation. And so we're going to see, as we go through this passage, we're going to see that then Abraham had to come up with a second rescue operation. And what we're going to also see is that in the Bible, there is a theme in that Christianity and the gospel is a rescue operation for people. One of the most famous rescue operations happened during the Iranian Revolution of 1978 and 79. It was called the Canadian Caper. And it's where, I believe, about 66 Americans were taken hostage in Iran. We're still having these problems with Iran today. We're still, at odds with them. And it all dates back to the late 1970s. 66 Americans were taken hostage. Six Americans escaped or weren't taken hostage, but they were forced to go into hiding, and they lived in the apartments of Canadian officials who were working for the Canadian embassy. And so ultimately they came up with a rescue attempt, and to come up with a rescue attempt, they wrote a script for a fictitious movie. You might know this story. The movie was called Argo. The fictitious movie was named Argo. A film in 2012 about this with Ben Affleck was heard, and it was the rescue operation that they were able to pull off to get the 6 Americans who were staying with these Canadians out. So they called it the Canadian Caper, and it came to life in the movie Argo. And so in our text today, we are looking at another kind of rescue operation. I would call it partially successful because Abraham set out for Lot's entire family to be saved. They weren't, only Lot and his 2 daughters, and we'll see how that unfolds here. The big idea of this message is that, like Abraham, we can participate in God's rescue operation for those facing imminent judgment. So we're going to look at 5 main ideas out of this passage. Let's take a look. First of all, we're going to see that there was a great escape. It says in verse 23 that Lot came to Zoar. That meant he got out of Sodom alive and survived. Second, there was a great destruction in verses 24 to 25 where rain of sulfur and fire came down on Sodom and Gomorrah. There was a great regret in verse 26. It says Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. There was a distant observer. It says that Abraham, in verses 27 and 28, went early in the morning and he went where he had stood and talked to God, and he looked down over the valley and saw smoke rising. And then there was a divine summary where God remembered Abraham, it says, and he sent Lot out of the midst. And something that occurred to me, Marcia and I were driving somewhere earlier this week, and it occurred to me that in this story, Abraham, although he was successful in helping Lot and his daughters get out, he probably never knew that. He probably thought that Lot had lost his life, because all he does is he looks down and he sees that everything is going up in smoke and it's been destroyed. So sometimes our efforts, we won't know the efforts until we get to the other side. We may have a significant effect on someone being rescued and we never would know because we just don't get the information. So let's take a look now at the first slide, or the next slide here. A great escape. A great escape. Lot, it says, came to Zoar. So the relationship I told you earlier, Lot was Abraham's nephew. He had come with Abraham out of Mesopotamia. You know, he's like the person in your family that you just can't get rid of. He just keeps following you along everywhere you go. You want them to move out, but they don't. That was Lot. Maybe he was still there. But actually, there came a point where Lot and Abraham, it says, they got so wealthy that the land could not support both of them. And so Abraham says, you know, we've got all the men are fighting. We've got so much here. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. So he gave Lot the choice. And here's what Lot chose. It says, Lot lifted up his eyes, Genesis 13:10, and saw that the valley of the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. So you see that description there of how the land was well watered. Now remember, what we saw here did not look like a well watered land, but before the destruction, that's exactly what it was. It was this place that was luscious and lots of water. And then Lot went east. We live in the east. We may be in the wrong spot. You might ought to go west, somewhere else. But we're in the east. Just like Lot, he chose the east. We've got to redeem the east here, don't we? And it goes on to say, Lot chose himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Abraham settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. And it says, now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. And so sometimes we make a choice that puts ourselves and our family in peril. We make a choice, and sometimes we do it intentionally because we have some goal that we have. And so we go ahead and we take the risk and we choose a place that puts our soul in peril, but there's other things that we're getting out of it, so we make the deal. Lot came to Zoar. And we said Abraham had to rescue him once, and then he had to rescue him again. Let's look at the second point now. So, there came a great destruction. Lot chose Sodom. It was wicked, and it's going to play out in this passage. So it says that the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah, sulfur and fire. A great destruction happened. And you notice the two words here, that he's going to use in the video. He's going to use the word severe fire and forever abandoned. And it's going to be this sulfur that comes down. So let's go to the second video here.
So I'm up here on the site called locally Numera, and this tower behind me was excavated, and 2 skeletons were found underneath the collapse of the tower on this side and one on the other side. There was burn destruction all through here, as you see in the picture from the excavation. However, it does seem like the collapse was able to preserve those skeletons better than most of the human remains here. You can see there's ash right here, and human remains, bones, are all through this ash. As you can see, there's this destruction layer is filled with human bone remains. Here's some ribs found in this area. Burned pottery, a total burn destruction. The excavators here, the main excavator here is Walter Rast, who excavated also at Babidra. And he describes what they found in the excavations here at Numera. He writes, "The burnt debris covering this site has appeared in almost every area excavated. Whatever the cause, it was certainly a tragedy. Obviously, the town suffered a severe fire and was forever abandoned." Now, despite Walter Rast being a secular archaeologist, his conclusion about what he found in the excavations at Babidra and here in Numera were these. He says this: "In the author's opinion, the vicissitudes of these 2 early Bronze III cities of Babidra and Numera may well be reflected in the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible." Okay, so Babidra was destroyed by fire at the same time that its cemetery was destroyed by fire. The city was never rebuilt. This city, associated with Gomorrah, has a burn destruction over it. The city came to a dramatic end with the fire destruction at the same time that Babidra was destroyed by fire. And this city was never, ever, ever lived in again. What is it that burned these cities and the cemetery at Babidra? The Bible describes it as burning sulfur raining down from the sky. And is there anything that matches this description that's still left in the geological record in this area? What is this burning sulfur? And there is an archaeology museum here that where the excavations that have taken place here over the years, the artifacts are on display. So I'm going to take you to that museum called the Museum at the Lowest Place on Earth and show you their display and what they make as a connection between the destructions and this burning sulfur described in the Bible. And so here at this archaeology museum, they have on display here these sulfur balls that are found in the area down near the Dead Sea. And so their interpretation is that these are the culprits, that this is what caused these cities in this area to be burned in the ancient past. Now, when I first saw this display, I got really excited and I went and scoured the archaeological sites searching for sulfur balls, and I couldn't find any anywhere. And so one day I was guiding a well-known geologist through this area, and I brought him here to this museum. I showed him this display, told him my dilemma, and he said, "Oh, well, these would not be preserved on land. They would only be preserved in water." And so he encouraged me to go look for them in the areas that were once under the Dead Sea. And so I went down near the shore of the Dead Sea and looked in these areas where the Dead Sea waters have receded. And this is when I started finding sulfur balls. just to give you an idea of how many sulfur balls there are. So this is a sulfur ball. Sulfur balls, all these are sulfur balls. Here, here, here. Look at all of them. There. Sulfur ball. Sulfur ball. Everywhere.
Like to see these stories and they seem, almost unbelievable and turn them into myths and things like that. But we do see that the archaeological evidence supports the very way the Bible describes this event happening as God raining on Sodom and Gomorrah, sulfur and fire, a place that used to be well-watered, the Bible says, everywhere. Let's go to point number 3, a great regret. It says, but Lot's wife, in verse 26, looked back. So not everyone who had the offer to escape accepted it and took up the offer. It says in chapter 19 that Lot's son-in-laws, when Lot told them that the city was about to be destroyed, they laughed and thought he was joking. As we move on, then it says also that even Lot was struggling to leave. It says in verse 16 of chapter 19, when they told him it was time to leave, it says, but he lingered, a word that's often translated delay. So he was struggling to leave the very life he had built in Sodom. Even though he was surrounded by people who were wicked, he felt a lot of moral pressure to compromise. He didn't want to leave. And then we see that not everyone followed the angel's instructions, which were to escape for your life, not look back, or stop anywhere in the valley. And it says that Lot's wife, when she looked back, she was struck and turned into a pillar of salt. And Jesus talked about this later on, and he used this story of Sodom and Gomorrah to tell us that things would be just as it was in the day of Lot, when people were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But on the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. It was very sudden. So it will be on the day the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, let no one who is on the housetop with his goods in the house not come down to take them away. And likewise, let the one who is in the field not turn back. Remember Lot's wife, he says. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. So she was attempting to kind of hold on to the life that she had. She was seeking to preserve the life that they had built there. And she was not, it seems, willing to give up. She was trying to preserve herself. And all such self-preservation efforts will be met in the end with the same result. So Lot escapes prior to the judgment, but his wife doesn't escape because she looks back, likely with regret and longing for the life they were leaving. And then it comes to Abraham, and it says in verses 27 and 28 that Abraham was a distant observer. He went early in the morning where he had stood before the Lord. He looked over into the valley, and he sees the smoke rising and the destruction that had occurred. Now, what's different about Abraham and Lot in this story? If we go back to Genesis 18, 3 men come to visit Abraham, and he shows extraordinary hospitality in a way that with Lot, the people of Sodom do not show hospitality to them. What do? They surround the house, they pound on the doors, and they say, bring them out, we want to know them. We want to have sex with them. So Abraham shows hospitality where the people of Sodom and Lot do not. Lot's stuck in the middle between the two. Abraham intercedes on Lot's behalf, and it saves him, right? He negotiates God down to 10 righteous people. In Judaism, they take this passage and they say that 10 is the minimum number of people where you should go to move to a community. If you don't have 10 righteous people, 10 people of faith, then you shouldn't go live there because there's not enough of a critical mass of spiritual support for you. You will not survive. You will not succeed in that situation. And even for public prayer in Judaism, you can't conduct public prayers without 10, normally males or 10 people, because it's not a minyan based on this passage. There's not enough of a spiritual support system. There's actually a great story a short story that I read once about a rabbi in New York City, and a man comes in and he's acting erratic, and he has what they call a debuk, which we call a demon. He thinks he has a demon, but there's not enough people there for prayer, so he can't exorcise the demon. He can't do anything until they get 10 people to come in. So finally, a couple of people come in, and then they're sending them back out in the street to get anybody who can come in to form a minyan so we can cast out the demon, and they never make it to the quorum. Minyan. For righteous people to exert an influence, a critical mass is needed. So oftentimes, again, we put ourselves in peril by putting ourselves in a situation where there's not a spiritual support system. That's what Lot did. Now, there's also been debate about the specific sins in this passage, and about whether Lot was really a righteous person or not. We've talked about the lack of hospitality. Abraham shows hospitality. The city of Sodom does not. Lot tries to, but is unsuccessful. And then Lot does something very crazy in that passage where he offers his daughters to the men who want to rape the men instead of sending the men out with him. And, he was in a tough spot, under a lot of pressure. So I guess the point is, stay out of those kind of situations. But it's been debated throughout history whether Lot was a righteous person or not. But the Bible in the 2 Peter says that Lot was tormented in living in Sodom pretty much his entire life. He was tormented by what the people around him were doing. He didn't like it. And so by living there, Lot then had to be rescued. Christianity is a rescue operation. Christianity is a faith that rescues people from being hostages, that rescues people from situations where they can't succeed, that rescues people from sin. That's what it does. And Abraham prayed for Lot, and he was rescued. Who are you helping to rescue? He had to be rescued twice. And then he still didn't do that great even after he was rescued twice. What does he end up doing? He has children by his daughters because they think they're the only people left, and then the line's not going to continue. We need to get a video back on. I'm getting depressed here. We'll get back to this again. The final point is the divine summary, is that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst. So we have the ability as God's people to help rescue people from sin, to help rescue people from where they are hostages to things in this world. And the last video segment is going to help tie this all together.
I've lived in the biblical world now for over 15 years. And I mean, things just always end up being more obvious than mysterious. So when you have something described in the Bible and you go to that place and you look it over, you look at the excavation work that's been done, there's always not just a fit, but an obvious fit. And so the more that I explore this land, the more that I excavate in it, and the more that I understand these different places and what the Bible describes in them, the more the biblical account just comes to life and is substantiated. And this is a perfect example of this. We're not talking about a burn destruction layer over just one city. We're talking about multiple cities. We're talking about burn layers over graves in the cemetery. And we're talking about a historical source in the Bible that gives us a description of what happened, describing this burning sulfur that is coming down like rain out of the sky. And then in this area, we have this geological phenomenon of these sulfur balls that are preserved in a geological layer and preserved because they were once under the Dead Sea. And so you bring it all together, the historical, the archaeological, the geological evidence, and we see very clearly how this all works exactly. It maybe still needs some more study, but we see very clearly the correlation between the history, the archaeology, and the geology. And so the biblical account is substantiated.
And notice what he said there. He said, things always end up being more obvious than mysterious. And what we can say about this is that there are probably some people here and you're living a certain way, and maybe you're in a church today for unusual reasons, but you're living a certain way, and it's obvious that the outcome is not going to be good. Like he said, the end ends up being more obvious than mysterious. It's not mysterious that sin, it's not mysterious that choosing to live a life away from God is going to end up in judgment. Maybe not as dramatic as this judgment here, but it will be judgment nonetheless. And so we've looked at the various ways here in this passage today that this event unfolded. And it was a dramatic ending of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, who were known for lack of hospitality, who were known for homosexual sin, who were known for living away from God. And it took a rescue operation to get Lot and offered his family members a way out. And God offers that to us today. People who are taken hostage, people who are living in bondage need to be set free. And the Bible tells us that ultimately Jesus came to earth for a rescue operation. What's it say? He said, I came to seek and to save those who are lost. I came to set the captives free. He came to rescue us from our sin. Divine judgment is real. We don't talk about it a lot anymore. We talk about therapy. We talk about therapeutic solutions to problems. But there is a reality called sin. There's a reality called judgment, and people will experience it. It doesn't have to be our divine destiny, because God has made a way for us. Sin wants to take you hostage. Satan wants to take you hostage, keep you in bondage, destroy your life. But the gospel is able to rescue. The gospel is able to make a way. And God has done it through Jesus Christ on your behalf. So let's not stay in the city that is going to be destroyed. Let's not stay in the place that is going to be destroyed. Let's take the opportunity, the way that God, there is a way that seems right to a man, but it ends in destruction. Let's go to Jesus, who has made a way for us to have truth and life and hope and victory. That's what he desires to do for you today. So don't miss out on your opportunity. This is a place where God is calling you. Reach out to him and let him rescue you today. Let's pray. God, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing in the world. You're making a way for people. You are giving hope to people in an uncertain world, Lord, in a place where we wonder why. We say things like, if God didn't spare Sodom, how can he spare the things that we see going on all around us? Help us today, God. Help those who are here that need rescued. Help those who are here today who have people in their lives that they know need rescued, and they don't know how it's going to work out, but just help them not to give up. Thank you today, Jesus, and it's in your name we pray. Amen.